Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's top 10 pilot or premiere episodes for Star Trek. In this video, I will rank the 10 pilot or series premiere, however you want to call it, episodes of Star Trek, and I will rank them in order from my least favorite to my favorite. So first, I gotta set up some ground rules or how I'm establishing this. So I am taking the 10 pilots from the 10 Star Trek shows. The original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, Discovery, Lower Decks, Picard, Prodigy, and Strange New Worlds. These are all the Star Trek shows that are out so far, so these will be the 10 episodes I will rank, and I will only do one pilot / series premiere per a show. I'm not going to do The Cage and Where No Man Has Gone Before and freaking cat and was that Man Trap? Was that what it was called? Because, the first original series episode that aired, I'm only doing one per show. So for the original series, it's just going to be Where No Man Has Gone Before, because that was the pilot that was accepted. And it's not going to be Man Trap because they aired it all out of order. So I'm not going to go by that. Anyway, I didn't include the animated series because if you consider that canon, and I know most people do, I get this argument, someone saying, it was always canon. No, it wasn't. I'm sorry. I grew up in the 90s. I was alive. I read all the material from the people who were attached to the show. No one considered the animated series canon in the 90s. I know, I was there, but anyway, other point. But even if you do, because yes, CBS, when they bought the rights, did make it canon so they can make more money. But even if you do consider it canon, I really consider it more an extension of the original series. It's got the same original series cast. I think of it more as like the Phantom season 4 of the original series. So I'm not going to include that either way. But, yeah, I am including Modern Trek, and I will tell you right now, not to spoil too much of my top 10, if you are one of those people who absolutely can't stand anything that came out in the past 10 years and thinks it's all garbage, then you're not going to be a fan of my top 10. Just saying. But yes, I am including the newer Star Trek shows as well. So, and that makes it 10. There's 10 of them. Isn't that convenient? So, let me start. First of all, let me lay it out to you. The 10 episodes I will be ranking. I will be ranking Where No Man Has Gone Before from the original series, Encounter Farpoint from Next Generation, Emissary from Deep Space Nine, Caretaker from Voyager, Broken Bow from Enterprise, the Vulcan Hello, and the Battle of Binary Star from Discovery, because I'm counting both episodes as the premiere, because even though the way they aired it was really stupid, where they just aired the Vulcan Hello on CBS, and then you had to go to the streaming to see Battle of Binary Stars, which by all means is the second part. These two episodes make one episode. So it was aired dumb, but I'm not going to count that against it when I'm ranking it. But anyway, I am counting both episodes together. And then there's Second Contact from Lower Decks, Remembrance from Picard, Lost and Found from Prodigy, and Strange New Worlds from Strange New Worlds. Not a very original title, mind you. But anyway, let me go ahead and jump into my rankings of these 10 pilot episodes or series premieres, because I'm not sure if all of them qualified technically as a pilot, but it doesn't. That's neither here nor there. So let me start with my number 10 and thus least favorite pilot of Star Trek, and that is Broken Bow. Now, from Star Trek Enterprise. Now, those who are familiar with my opinions on Enterprise, I absolutely cannot stand the first 2 seasons of Enterprise. I think they are the worst Star Trek has ever done. I think the show did really seriously improve in season 3 and 4 when it got different showrunners. But, yeah, I think... And I got to be perfectly honest, when I went down, I saw this episode when it first aired, so I went and sat down to watch Enterprise, and I really wanted it to be good. But I was kind of, after that opening sequence with that terrible music, it's been a long time, I was so distracted. Like, that just told me right there, I was so blown away and so horrified by what I was seeing. It distracted me from the rest of the episode, and it tainted it. It tainted, not that the episode's good in the first place. The episode's it's kind of dumb. They try to go out of their way to try to make Trip and Archer idiots, and they go out of their way to try to make, ooh, isn't this strange and new, and oh, look at these aliens, they got fired, they can do tongues and shit. And and the main plot was kind of X-Files ripoff-ish, and it was with like the Sulban or whatever, and I wasn't really interested in it, and so yeah, I think this is the worst pilot. Maybe it would have been better if they had better music. Anyway, my number 9. So second least favorite pilot of Star Trek is Encounter at Farpoint. Look, again, Next Generation is another show that had. The first 2 seasons were not that good, and it got better in its third. But the difference with Next Gen is they went on for longer, so the majority of the show is great. It's just got those 2 not so good seasons at the start, and the first episode was definitely a bad way to kick off the show. You could say, oh, but it introduced Q, but Q was actually not a good character in this episode. He didn't become a good character until later. I dare say season 3. Most people will say Q Who. I disagree. I think Q Who's overrated, but I talked about that in a different video. I think he didn't become an interesting character until they made him fully comedic, which was Deja Q. And then he was good from there on. But anyway, regardless, he was kind of the way he threatened the crew. It was a bit of a... Didn't work to have him as the villain because he was omnipotent power. So how can the crew actually defeat him? I don't know. And he was just silly in this episode, and it didn't really, in the main plot with them discovering that the city was actually this flying jellyfish was boring. There wasn't much to it. It reminded me of the motion picture where most of the episode was spent like with these montages showing how cool the ship looked. Ooh, it can separate in 2. And this is virtually never going to come up ever again because it's a dumb idea. Anyway, so not a very good pilot. So now we'll get into my number 8. And that is Where No Man Has Gone Before from the original series. Now, I will say, I didn't include the Cage because the Cage the show wasn't picked up on the Cage. None of the actors, except for Leonard Nimoy, continued forward. And so Where No Man Has Gone Before is really the first episode of what became the original series. I'm not talking about air dates because they aired it all out of fucking order because the network is stupid. But so this is really the first episode they made with that cast. And if I included the Cage, it would have ranked much higher. But I'm sticking with my rules, only 1 episode per, and this one qualifies more, and it's not very good. Honestly, I thought this was like a tacky horror wannabe schlock episode. I mean, I don't think it's terrible, don't get me wrong, but there's not much to it. It's very below, it's like just below average is how I would call it. It's a bit cheesy, but not too cheesy as to be terrible, but cheesy enough as to not be interesting. And again, they're going up against a god. This is the Roddenberry thing. He was obsessed with these evil god characters. I guess obsessed with starting his shows with them. And it wasn't that interesting. And I didn't really buy that Kirk and Mitchell were friends. I just wasn't feeling it. So I had no attachment to when he had to kill his own friend. I felt nothing. So I don't think it was effective at doing what it set out to do. And the other psychologist character seemed really underdeveloped. I didn't care about her either. So yeah, not a very good episode. So then we'll get into my number 7, which is the Vulcan Hello / Battle of Binary Stars from Discovery. These episodes were okay. I think Discovery, especially, it's still new and fresh in the mind, and I don't think it ever hit its stride the way that Enterprise and Next Generation did. But I think it's definitely improved since its first 2 seasons. The first season was trying too hard to be gritty and on edge, and look how gritty and modern we are. And I think that comes off in this episode. Now, some people hated these episodes and said that this show should have started with episode 3 when they actually introduced the ship of Discovery, and that this felt like an unnecessary prologue. I disagree. I actually like how we got this story instead of just being told about it in the flashbacks. Like, I think that would have been worse. Some people have said that though they should have just told the story in flashbacks and started the show with, episode 3 when they actually showed discovering Captain Lorca. I disagree. I think you get a lot of nuance, and I like that we actually saw it play out. We actually saw the relationship between Burnham and Georgiou, which would become very important later on in the show, particularly when they introduced the Mirror Universe version of Georgiou. I think it wouldn't have been anywhere near as effective as it was had you not had this 2-parter. And plus, it was great to see where Burnham was coming from and her backstory. And so it was decent. So I would say this is a decent pilot. So next, we will get into my number 6, which is Lost and Found from Prodigy. Now we're getting into the pilots that I like. I think this was a very effective pilot for Prodigy. It's Prodigy is only halfway through the season. They're taking forever to show the second half of season 1, so really I should call it a different season. But that's neither here nor there. But the point is, we're not that deep into the Prodigy as the making of this video, so I'm still not sure what this is setting up for. But it hooked me right away, got me interested in the characters right away. In fact, I think most of the episodes that came after this one were not as good. So it had a good start, where with these group of ragtag kids meeting each other, and they're in prison as slaves, and they're working together to break out. And then one of the daughter of the guy who's holding them prisoner is trapped on the ship with them, and how they're stealing the Starfleet ship. It was effective meeting. It was a good pilot. It got me on board. I really liked it. So next we will get into my top 5. Number 5, which is Second Contact from Lower Decks. So Lower Decks has certainly had better episodes. It certainly got better even later on in the first season. But it was pretty effective. It had a couple storylines. The storyline on the planet with Boimler, and Mariner going off the rails, and Boimler being a kiss ass. It's kind of establishing that, but then Boimler getting thrown around in the mouth of this beast or whatever, but he was never in any danger. He was just screaming the whole time. That I didn't think was that funny nor interesting. I actually like the B plot better. in this episode, which involved like the crew of the Cerritos turning into zombies, while Rutherford was like on a date, and him and this date start like shooting all the zombies. Because I like this plot because it was so funny, the nonchalant way the crew were reacting to this like horrific, extraordinary situation, but they're acting, and this is something that will be done repeatedly throughout Lower Decks runs, where extraordinary shit will happen, but they will be nonchalant, like it's an everyday occurrence. So like, oh, the crew's turning into zombies. What, again? I don't think they said that specifically, but that was kind of their attitude, and they're like, oh yeah, that person's a zombie. Oh, okay, whatever. Let's just go shoot them, I guess. And it was funny. So it does set that stage on how funny the show would be, but it definitely is not the best representation of how funny the show would go on to be. It definitely, Lower Decks seems to have a format of at the end of each season tends to be where the really good stuff comes out. So the season didn't start with the best one, which turned off some people. I noticed some people saw this episode were kind of like, show's not for me. I think they should have stuck with it because it does get better. But it was a decent enough pilot. It set the stage for what the show would do. So then we'll get into my number 4, which is Emissary from Deep Space Nine. The A plot with Sisko was a great character story for Sisko. I want to start with that right away. And the A plot with Sisko was absolutely amazing. It was very powerful stuff. Begins with the death of his wife, and it shows him like being forced into this assignment he doesn't really want, but then meeting this religious figure who tells him that he is like an important figure in this Bajoran, this alien religion of these aliens he just met, and yet he becomes intertwined with discovering this wormhole, and he meets these wormhole aliens who exist outside of linear time, and he has to kind of explain to them what it means to exist in linear time. And doing so, he has to confront his own pain over his wife's death, which was amazing scenes. It was like so emotionally powerful, like brings me to tears watching this. But you might ask, well, if you think so highly of this, Mark, why is this only at number 4, not number 1? Well, the answer to that is the B plot. Not so good. I'm sorry to say. The B plot involved, the station coming under attack with Cardassians and Odo. A lot of the way these characters were introduced was very clunky. A lot of unnecessary, clunky exposition. The way Bashir and Dax were just thrown in there has afterthoughts. Odo is spouting out exposition about like out of nowhere. It's like, hey Odo, you want a coffee? I don't know where I'm from. They found me near the wormhole. And it was like, okay, well, how about that coffee over there? It wasn't quite that bad, but it was like that. And then the conflict with the Cardassians attacking the station was boring and dull, and Kira was spouting unnecessary threats or whatever, being like overly dramatic. But if I was a Starfleet officer, I'd probably say you're right, but I'm just a terrorist. I don't know better. I'm just a caveman. Anyway, that's something else. So yes, I didn't like this B plot at all, and I think it signifies, because Deep Space Nine, like most Star Trek shows, or at least the older ones, had a rough start in the first season. The first season was decent, barring the episode Duet, which was the masterpiece. First season, not so good. Second season, same thing. And so the B plot represents that rough start of the first season where they didn't really get their shit together. But the A plot was amazing, so which is why it pushes it up to number 4. But I've seen people who say put this in the top 10 of Deep Space Nine episodes, and I completely disagree with that. I think that B plot completely brings it down. But it's that A plot's still amazing. Anyway, let me get into my number 3 favorite pilot episode / premiere, and that is Caretaker from Voyager. Now, this I think is a solid premiere. And not to sort of spoil things, although you can figure this out by process of elimination, my top 2 are both from modern Trek shows. So Voyager, for the Caretaker, for the longest time before these modern Trek shows came out, Caretaker was my favorite pilot of Star Trek. And I think it is. Of the 90s era, I think this is the best, most effective pilot, because, I mean, there is some clunky exposition in there, but it's nowhere near as bad as Encounter at Farpoint or Emissary were in that regard. But for the most part, it's exciting. There was too much of Emissary, and pretty much all of Encounter at Farpoint was all about introducing characters and throwing things in, and the plot was kind of, especially with Encounter at Farpoint, the plot was just an afterthought. Whereas with Caretaker, it feels like the plot was the forethought. It was the main purpose, was this really interesting, suspenseful story about this weird alien, like catching these ships from the Alpha Quadrant and like flinging them to the Delta Quadrant where they're trapped, and they have to interact with the species there, and then the Starfleet ship has to team up and deal with the ship of terrorists that they were sent to hunt and arrest, and now they have to team up with them. Like, that's an interesting premise. And then they meet the Kazon, who, granted, they're not very interesting overall, but in this episode they work. And the Ocampa, who, again, in this episode, they work in this situation where 2 of the crew members have these diseases that they have to try to cure, and they're stuck on this alien planet. Like, it's an interesting plot, and then they introduce the characters around this interesting plot. Like, intermingle it, and it feels more natural. And they do great character work for Tom Paris. They do great character work for Harry Kim. And maybe not so great for Chakotay somewhat, but yeah, they got really interesting interactions with the introduction of Neelix and the way he interacts with Tuvok. Like, they managed to like showcase all these characters, but while having a very interesting plot at the same time. So I think, yeah, it is one of the most effective pilots in Star Trek, and it was my favorite up until recently. So now, we'll get into my number 2 second favorite pilot premiere episode of Star Trek, and that is Remembrance from Picard. Now, I know what you're going to say. Picard is not a good show. And I agree. I don't think Picard is a good show. I think season 2 was the singular worst. I used to think 1 and 2 of Enterprise were the worst seasons of Star Trek, but that's until Star Trek Picard season 2 came out. It's definitely by far, easily the worst season of all Star Trek. It is a giant piece of garbage that someone just flung on the screen. And the first season is not a cakewalk either. It does have some of its highlights, particularly this episode, but it was a mixed bag, and it didn't really flow right, and it didn't come together. There was too much that was wrong with it. But all that being said, this pilot episode was fucking amazing. Like, I was blown away. This is like, as I said, this comes at number 2, so, but this is one of the most effective pilots I've ever seen on TV ever. Like, I put it up there with, like, the Lost pilot and shit. Now, as I said, like, the show goes completely downhill, or not complete, but at least downhill after this episode. It teeters out, and it kills off the character of Daj, which works for this episode, but it was a mistake for the show overall because they replaced her with Soji, who's played by the same actress, but ironically, nowhere near as interesting as Daj was, because this episode did such a great job of setting up Daj. This Soji character, you never cared about her as much. But this was a good hook. Like, it was like... And it was a great character story for Picard. We got to see him 25 years later after he resigned from Starfleet because he didn't like the direction they went in. And now he's being, when he tries to speak up against the direction Starfleet went in, and how people need to, save lives even if they're from the so-called enemy. Like, that's powerful stuff. And then you get the plot with this girl who's like, thinks she's a normal girl just hanging out with her boyfriend, and all of a sudden people try to kill her boyfriend and try to kill and abduct her, and she's having to deal with this identity crisis, and she knows to go to Picard for help, and Picard's finding out that she's actually an android, the daughter of Data, and how he cherishes the memory of Data, and you see that dream sequence that Data at the start of the episode. Like, it's really good. This is a really good pilot, even though the rest of the show totally did not live up to this pilot. It doesn't change the fact that this is a really good pilot. So anyway, we will now get into my number one favorite pilot of Star Trek, and that is Strange New Worlds from Strange New Worlds. Now, granted, it didn't have a very inventive title, but I really like this pilot episode. First of all, Strange New Worlds easily the best show in modern Trek. Just throwing that out there. Like, I was so blown away by every episode. Anson Mount as Pike is fucking amazing, and this really, really is the first of the modern Trek shows that really does live up to the legacy of Star Trek and presents the world of Star Trek. Well, other than Lower Decks, but that's more of a comedy though. But this is the first serious drama to do it. And this the pilot episode was an amazing way to throw off the season. It hit on all the themes of Star Trek. It showcases these characters and why they're so interesting, why they're so amazing. It did such a good job of introducing the new characters. Now, granted, some of these characters we know from classic Trek, but even these newer versions were reintroduced in Discovery, such as, Pike, Spock, and Una, number one. But this episode does a better job of introducing some of the newer characters like Leon and Mega, and newer versions of them anyway. In the newer version of Uhura, and it does a really good job of showing how this crew works as a camaraderie, and how it's similar to Caretaker. It has an interesting plot. It's not just, hey, here's the new characters, like in Encounter Farpoint. It has a very interesting, very unique plot of them going to this pre-warp civilization that they were started first contact procedures with, because they thought they had discovered warp drive, and only to realize they haven't. They discovered warp weapons, and they've only discovered this because of them. And Pike, saying to hell with the Prime Directive, and realizing it was his own mistakes for why they were about to all blow themselves up, so decided to intercede and reveal themselves and give this really powerful speech of how Earth was almost in danger of annihilation. And they showed clips from modern day news, which I love. It's in the tradition of Star Trek, completely in the tradition of Star Trek, to make commentary on modern day life. And the Pike was just such an amazing character. How he started out with the beard and was kind of given up because he had this prophecy of his death, and it's really fucked him up. But he came out of it to save his first officer, and and they tied that into the theme of this episode too, because he realized that he can't just hide from his fate, and that he needs to it was pushing him to do something to save this world. It was amazing, really great episode, and I do think it is the best pilot episode or / series premiere of Star Trek. So that's it for my particular top 10. As I said, fans of the modern Trek shows I know will not agree with this, but let me know. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Be sure to check out my channel if you enjoyed this video for many more Star Trek videos and videos on other shows too, like House of the Dragon, Lord of the Rings of Power, and Lower Decks. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.